let it slide.
Nah, I done did a lot just to get by, so I can't let it slide. I escaped the mental shackles, I ain't got patience for these bastards.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade, and today we're going to take a look at Becoming Warrior, the Dark Side of the Ring documentary on The Ultimate Warrior. In addition to that, I did find one of the Ultimate Warrior's old blog posts from the Wayback Machine, and I will be reading choice quotes from that, so it ought to be interesting. And of course, it shows that there is always more than one side to the Ultimate Warrior's political leanings. Let's put it like that. But first, we have to talk about the show before we get into the politics of it. So the star of the show was Shari, the wife of the Ultimate Warrior from 1982 to 1991. Everything that she added to this was incredibly colorful, and she was pretty fair when it comes to Jim and how he was treated by other people, how he treated other people. Jake the Snake Roberts, Jim Cornette, Eric Bischoff, and of course, Jim Ross was involved with this. Ross and Cornette, if you listen to them over the course of the last, 5 or 6 years, you know that they've been repping Ultimate Warrior every chance they got. And of course they did. Jake the Snake Roberts, of course, ripped the Ultimate Warrior. But this was not quite the brutal burial that I expected it to be, right? It was not the vicious and violent burial that I expected it to be. This is actually it was fair, but there was a lot of criticisms along the way. Basically, people just saying, oh, he's an asshole. He was hard to deal with. He wasn't a good wrestler. It was a lot of just them saying that stuff. He didn't care about the business. He didn't care about hurting other people, and him saying mean stuff to people. Of course, a lot of this stuff is out of context, which is a huge problem when people are just quote mining, like these folks who are looking for things to get upset about. Let's not get too close into that. We'll get into that stuff later. So since Sherry was the one person that I think if you would have took everything that she said and added it to the biography that A&E had done, it would have been so much better. It would have been fantastic. It would have taken that biography to the next level. All you had to do was take everything Sherry said in here and moved it to the biography, and it would have been so much better. But Jim Cornette and Jim Ross, they were able to tell you facts and different things like that. Of course, they made fun of Destrucity and, his comic books and all that kind of stuff, right? Because it was very oddball behavior that the Warrior had gotten this huge ego. And we are already, I'm not going to go over a lot of the things that we've already talked about, like his relationship with Vince McMahon, which even Sherry says was he saw Vince as a father figure. So it was pretty obvious to everybody who was involved. So I'm not going to go through all that stuff. He's going to talk about his crazy philosophy, the Destrucity, and the comic books, and his attempt to try to monetize the Ultimate Warrior and create something that lasts, that he can own beyond the Ultimate Warrior, beyond the ring, rather. So, but I really loved Sherry's involvement, and I thought that she was in here to sort of swift boat us, that she was going to be the one that's going to kind of drop like this huge bomb on us. But it's like, not really. Not really. But she's talking about how she met him. He was a bouncer at a club. He was a bodybuilder when she met him. He was huge. And that he was fully dedicated to being somebody. He just wanted to be somebody. He didn't want to be the broke kid that he had been growing up. He wanted to, and changing his body made him believe that you can change your life, because that's what he did. And, of course, we go through the whole him going out to L.A., meeting Steve Borton, going to Jerry Jarrett, going to Memphis because he wasn't good. Then get sent to Mid-South, when they that's where Jim Ross said, I've never seen a wrestler with less ability than the Ultimate Warrior. I've never seen a wrestler with less ability than the Ultimate Warrior. Hot damn, Jim. Come on, man. That was a hot one. That was probably one of the spicier ones in here. But she says, Sherry says, this is when she started seeing Jim get selfish. was when he was in Mid-South working in Louisiana. And Steve was all in for the team, and that Jim was just basically out for himself. And then they go to WCCW World Class Championship Wrestling down in Dallas. David Manning was here, which is pretty cool. And they talked about the name, the Dingo Warrior, and that, he was a wild warrior or a wild dog. And that's when he had that crazy mustache too, the Fu Manchu. And then Sherry is basically talking about, helping him put the look together, the makeup, the tassels, and stuff like that they really wanted him to do. And so that was cool. Then Sherry, she still had the letters, and she had the pictures of like some kid on the Ultimate Warrior's lap, and Ultimate Warrior being very proud of his wrestling buddy. This is from like the WWF days. She still had the letter that Jim got when he was accepted to the WWF. She still had it. Like, that was fucking cool. Like, that's some really cool shit that they didn't have in the biography because he hadn't met Dana yet. So it was that's why I say Sherry, if she would have been in that original documentary, it would have been so much better. Of course, Jake Snake Roberts talked about him hurting guys, him not caring about, people's injuries and stuff like that, basically being a giant gorilla, and that Bobby Heenan hated him. So everybody knows that Bobby Heenan hated the Ultimate Warrior. So one of the mean things that he said was that he hoped that Bobby Heenan would die from cancer. He was a vengeful dude, the Ultimate Warrior. He did not let things go. Bobby Heenan, of course, had been burying him for years and stuff like that. And wrestling fans, we love Bobby Heenan, right? So it is something that you're going to take personal when this guy is showing absolutely no sympathy for Bobby Heenan. None. But it's hard to say what their relationship was because they did not like each other. And it was, it's still rough. Like, you would think that when you see somebody that you've worked with, even if you don't really like them, you see them in that kind of situation, you would kind of warm up. But Jim wasn't like that. He was kind of a fuck you kind of guy, and sometimes those people exist. And I fully don't like what he said about Bobby Heenan. And I'm not going to read that stuff. That stuff was ugly. Like some of the stuff he said about the Hurricane Katrina victims, some of the stuff he said about gay people, I can be like, I can hem and haw about it. But that stuff about Bobby Heenan is completely out of bounds. And, I can't rock with that. But at the same time, they had a personal antagonistic relationship where they didn't like each other, and he also didn't like Hulk Hogan and antagonized him too. But Sherry basically, and not talking about Bobby Heenan anymore, but basically she says that in the WWF, when he started getting the rocket push, the locker room started kind of talking about him, that he couldn't work, that he wasn't good, that he sucked. And she talked about how that made him self-conscious, and it made him sensitive, and it made him insecure. And he had, all these anxiety disorders. And they talked about it in the biography, that he was on all these medications. And that he's putting all of this pressure on himself to be the big draw, to be the big character that he needed to be in order to take Hulk Hogan's spot, in order to be the man. He had to, put a lot of pressure on himself. He had to perform. He had to do more. And, the locker room hates him. And some of that is professional jealousy. And some of it is Warrior's an asshole. And some of that is he's hard to work with. And some of that is, he's making more money than most people and he has less experience. So a lot of that stuff is going on. People wanted his spot. People wanted to wring his fucking neck. There's a lot going on, And it should come as no surprise that when you get to the top of the cards, that's when you started getting these locker room, well, he was an asshole comments. Because it never fails. Hogan gets called an asshole even by people who made money with Hogan. There's very few wrestlers that had come out and said, I loved working with Hulk. Most of them were like, Hulk Hogan's an asshole. Yeah, he's a piece of shit. And then you got Warrior calling him a piece of shit. Vince McMahon is calling him a piece of shit. And it was like Randy was for a long time the only one of the Trinity of the WWF, the big Trinity, Warrior, Hogan, and Savage. For a long time, Savage was the only one that was crystal clean. And it wasn't until, they started talking about him and Liz that people started being like, oh, well, Randy's a nut too. All three of them are fucking crazy. But, that's just us being fans, man. We not knowing these guys personally and listening to other people who were jealous of them and people who were, reading things into when they didn't know. And so now you got Dana Warrior trying to clean up shit, and you got Lanny Poffo trying to clean up shit. It's just, just stuff like that. But Warrior actually did care about the business. He cared because he was talking about, Sherry talked about how excited he was to be the world champion. And that, he was really excited to get this spot and how much he really enjoyed being a superhero for kids. And it seemed like Warrior kind of had the Goldberg, and Warrior and Goldberg are very similar in that way, and that they started really believing the gimmick, and that is that they were pushed as a superhero for children, and therefore they felt like they should be treated like superheroes for children, which means you don't get beat, you don't lose, you don't look stupid. You go in there, you crush an opponent, you leave. You're a living Superman. You're Batman. Superman doesn't get beat in the comics, at least not that often. So why should the Ultimate Warrior ever get beat? He's got to beat everybody. Some people say like, he's got a huge ego. It's like, well, think about it. When you have this character, how often do you really beat the Ultimate Warrior? I can't tell you how many times I saw Ultimate Warrior lose a match. And I can tell you right off the rip, I don't think I've ever saw the Ultimate Warrior lose a match clean. I'm really sitting here thinking of it right now, trying to remember if the Ultimate Warrior ever lost a match clean. I cannot tell you. But Hogan was the same way. Savage was the only one in the Trinity that was willing to take L's clean. That's which is weird. But so Sherry says after he won the title, Jim needed a moment to himself. And he went over to the corner and he just kind of took it to himself that he had really worked so hard to get to this spot. And then she said the Ultimate Warrior came home and that he started engaging in all kind of erratic behavior and that he was clearly not well. And you could hear the producers off screen like, okay, what do you mean by erratic behavior? And I think this was when the bomb was going to drop. I was really worried that she was going to be like, and he just started beating me. And he just started hitting me. I thought that's what she was going to say. And then she was like, no, he was cheating. She found out he was cheating on her. He had, he was like, what was that dweeb that ran for president? He had binders of women. He had like a day planner with like all these hoes, like ring rats that he was banging on the road. He had like a day planner full of broads that he would call when he go into town, which seems like a wrestler thing. That's not out of the realm for wrestlers. But it ended up destroying their marriage. And she divorced him because he was cheating with all these different women. And then, of course, he same year that he got divorced, later, a couple of months later, he lost the title. Then his relationship with Vince sort of soured. We know all this. And then we get the Jake Roberts story that he was planning to work with Warrior before he wrestled for the title. He was going to have to run a feud with Warrior. But Warrior ended up getting himself fired. This is when he sent the infamous letter to Vince McMahon, and they had Jim Cornette read Vince McMahon's reply, which was brutal and fucking funny. It was funnier hearing it in Cornette's voice. I'm pretty sure he's going to read that thing in full on his show eventually. So Sherry basically started talking about how, Warrior, even after they were divorced, her and Warrior stayed friends. And she talked about how he became obsessed with Hulk Hogan and that he wanted everything Hulk Hogan had. And this, of course, led to the list of demands in 1991. And that, that she says that basically Vince had spoiled Warrior. That, when Warrior wanted his own dressing room, Vince gave it to him. When Warrior wanted his own limousine, Vince gave it to him. And that essentially he thought that if he could play this card and Vince would give in. And it makes sense for him to think that way. Look, Vince has to deal with egos. Like this, Brock Lesnar, same thing, right? Brock wants a private jet to and from everywhere. He don't want to ride with anybody else. He doesn't want to travel with anybody else. So when you're a big star, Vince will give you these concessions, you know. And it seems like Warrior just wanted to be by himself, not to be around people. And it makes sense that he wouldn't want to be around people if they're talking shit about him, right? I mean, if these people hate you and the entire locker room are talking about how you're the shits and that, working with you sucks and that you're not a nice guy and you're a piece of shit and all this kind of stuff, then yeah, I can see. Oh, also, I did read that JBL said some stuff about Ultimate Warrior, because Ultimate Warrior had made a comment about draws, which is another thing that I'm not a fan of him for. Him calling draws a cripple, and he said something about somebody else. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head because I didn't write them down in my notes. But he's made some comments that I don't agree with. That I can say is not based and not cool. Draws is another one. He's the guy who got injured in the ring. We shouldn't be taking shots at him. So he talked about the legal battles. They bounced back and forth. And then this we start talking about Destrucity in 1996, because Jim Ross and Jim Cornette was actually there. And Destrucity is staying true to yourself while achieving your goals. It's the truth between destiny and reality. And I'm sitting here, and I heard them thinking to myself, like, what does that mean? What the truth between destiny and reality? I'm thinking destiny is in the future, reality is right now. So he's trying to create this philosophy that you need to follow your goals while still being true to yourself. So your goals is in your destiny, and yourself is who you are. So I'm not going to try to, untangle that mess right now, but it does sound nutty. And if you're not interested in trying to unravel that, I can understand it. And basically, he talked about 1996. He crushed Triple H and essentially created the Clique, because Triple H was like, never again, never again will I go through this. But basically 1996 is when Sherry saw him last, because she says that at this point, Jim had opened up his own gym and he was running the gym and he was happy. And that they were still friends, but now he had met Dana and he was dating Dana and she was dating someone else. And when she got pregnant with her daughter by this other guy, they thought it would be best if they didn't hang out at the gym anymore, because they both had significant others. They were getting married. And so she tells this beautiful story that the Warrior basically says that, hey, I wish I could have been a better husband. You're going to be a great mom. I will love you forever. And, thank you for being my friend and all this kind of stuff, being in my corner. And I apologize for not being a good husband. And that was the last time she saw him, in 1996. That's insane, man. Like, and to be quite honest, this documentary deflated the moment Sherry wasn't really a part of it anymore. Because right after that, we kind of started going into the speaking tour. They skipped WCW. Everybody skips his WCW stuff. They went into the speaking tour, where he was where Jim Cornette got to call him a right-wing nut job that hated gay people. And they had some stuff on the screen about blacks. I was really looking for that, because on the screen I actually stopped and read it. I paused it so that I could read what was going on there. And it says that these black people, these obvious black people, were acting like unchained Remus monkeys or something like that. Of course, it's completely out of context. I have no idea what the hell he's talking about. And no context is provided. So, I mean, just because you say that black people are acting like monkeys, am I supposed to be offended and supposed to say that that's racism? He didn't say black people were monkeys or subhumans or something like that. He said they're acting like monkeys. I've heard black people say worse about black people. So, I mean, that's the thing, man. Like, let's put it this way. If you're a thick-skinned black person like I am, you can see stuff like that and not get too upset about it. Because, again, for starters, it's out of context. I don't know what he's talking about. You know, I see black people fighting in like Applebee's or McDonald's, and I say these niggas look like a bunch of apes in a zoo, and nobody's gonna call me a racist. You know, so is that what he's looking at? I don't know. I can't find the blog. If somebody can find the blog for me, I can read it and decide from there. So I can't say what was going on in that particular incident. So, but of course, they spent a lot of time on him talking about gays. But he also called Hulk Hogan a cuck, saying that Hulk Hogan didn't care if his wife slept with other men, which was hilarious, considering what Hulk Hogan ended up doing to Bubba the Love Sponge. Really strange stuff. So then Jake Roberts, who was still bitter about some shit that happened in 1991, was trying to kill Ultimate Warrior at the Hall of Fame. And this was a very touching to me too. I believe I heard this story before, but I didn't remember it. So Jake Roberts is at the Hall of Fame, and Warrior, he's looking for Warrior because he wants to start some shit. And he said the Warrior just appeared behind him and apologized to him, and you know, for fucking up his career and making him lose all that money that they were going to work to make together. And he talked about how he was disarmed by it, that he seemed like a completely different guy, that he was contrite, you know, and that's pretty crazy, man. It's pretty crazy. And you know, Warrior being one of those guys who was he was outside the ring a lot longer than he was inside the ring, you know, and you know, it was pretty strange. I thought that was pretty sweet because it really touched Jake that, you know, Warrior was going around making amends with people. You know, these are guys that didn't like him, you know, 30 years prior, but now they're older men. They're more mature. They're not in direct competition for spots and money anymore, which is probably the bigger issue here, is that these guys are not in competition for spots and money anymore. So now they can afford to be nice to each other. They don't have to backbite each other anymore because they're like, oh, that old dumb shit we were doing in the locker room in '88. Come on, bro. You know, like, no big deal. You know, that was then, this is now. But in '88, it was, fuck that nigga. I'll stop, kill you. You know, but, you know, 28 years later or whatever, it's like, no big deal. And we end, of course, with Warrior passing away in 2014. And Jim Ross basically saying that Warrior didn't look well at that time anyway. And it felt like it ended okay. You know, it ended okay. I tell you, they let Jim Cornette and they let Jim Ross bury the Ultimate Warrior. That's pretty much what they did. Sherry didn't really bury him. She just kind of confirmed that he was acting erratic at home and on the road, and he turned into somebody completely different than the guy she married, which of course makes sense. She didn't want to be married to the Ultimate Warrior. She wanted to be married to Jim Hellwig. And Jim Hellwig had pretty much gotten lost in being the Ultimate Warrior. And that's classic wrestling stuff, is the guy got lost in his gimmick. You know, you can make 100 wrestling documentaries. 98 of them are going to be guy got lost in his gimmick. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've read quite a few wrestling books now, where you get that family of the guy thinks that he's got a massive fucking ego, you know. And I'll give you a good example. Bret Hart. I just finished the book on the Harts, you know, and the words Bret Hart and ego are used in just about every sentence near the end. When Bret's name was mentioned, Bret's ego was mentioned, or Bret being arrogant, or, you know, because he made the most money out of all of them, and he was the biggest success, and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, oh, Bret's got a huge ego, you know, and it's like you really get a huge ego when you're successful, you know, and when that's another one of those wrestling things, man. Guys get full of the gimmick. You start to actually believe it, and when these guys are, you know, these types of personalities, they bang heads. But Warrior has said a lot of things that I don't like. He said some stuff about draws. I don't like that. The stuff about Bobby the Brain Heenan, I don't like that. The stuff that he said about Hurricane Katrina, I wish he had not said it, I understand what he meant. Basically he was saying that that New Orleans was basically a den of iniquity. Basically, he kind of, if you were to put it in Christian terms, he basically said it was Sodom and Gomorrah, and that these people were sick and filthy and disgusting already. And they talk about how great New Orleans was, but he said he doesn't think so. I mean, this is a guy who was on a moral rampage. He was one of those guys, and a huge personal responsibility guy, what you would call a almost America First MAGA style conservative. And when you look at the way he talked about certain people, it was very unkind. But we talked to death about the things that he said about gay people. About the queers don't make the world work. So I thought that upon reading the blog, and I didn't read the whole thing, it was incredibly long and it needed to be edited. But I read it, and I'm going to read to you now some of the things that I found in the Ultimate Warrior's blog that I thought maybe if you were going to have a conversation about his feelings on homosexuality and the liberal agenda and all that kind of stuff that you probably need to hear. So let's talk about the Ultimate Warrior's comments about homosexuals. So I found one of his old blog posts where he talks about homophobia and his previous queering doesn't make the world work comment. So he clarifies his comment here. This is something, again, that is never, ever, ever talked about when they talk about Ultimate Warrior making the comments of queering doesn't make the world work. He says this. He says, my infamous comment that queering doesn't make the world work means exactly what thinking people know it does. It simply means queers cannot continue the existence of mankind because they cannot procreate. Even for a queer to come into existence, organic reproduction, conception, must happen between the two unique sexes, male and female. For me, as for many others, this, quote, natural necessity emboldens my belief about what is normal and abnormal. There is nothing more to it than that. So, again, he was talking about when he was comparing legitimacy and illegitimacy, he's basically saying homosexuality is abnormal and illegitimate. Now, people have a problem with this comment. Now, I even have a problem with this comment. I'll tell you why. Let's talk about that first. Gays can reproduce. They just choose not to, right? A gay man can still produce sperm. He just chooses not to have sex with women. So there's nothing wrong with his reproduction. So he can technically reproduce. He can donate sperm to someone else or something like that. And hell, even gay men have practiced heterosexuality, or there's a lot of gray area with that kind of stuff. But this is not 100% correct. But the concept of gays being abnormal is correct. If something is shows in less than 5% of the population, I wouldn't call that normal, okay? It's not like gays are 45% or 50% of the population. They're less than 10%, okay? So I wouldn't call that normal, but I see how people get emotional about that kind of stuff. And that's one of his things, too, is he talks a lot about people being emotional. But he says that my statement does not mean homosexuals cannot contribute productively, effectively, and positively to the world. The statement does not mean that I think all queers should be rounded up and confined to their own colony, though San Francisco seems to be doing this all by itself and not in a very healthy way, mind you. So he's talking about, San Francisco, gay capital of the planet Earth, and it's definitely not looking very good in 2021. And this was written in 2008 or something like that, 2009. He continues, I am not intimidated by individual queers or the queer lifestyle. What bothers me is that many radical modern queers have a collective agenda to culturally wrap, quote, natural and unnatural for what is unnatural and abnormal. I refuse to lie down and bend over and accept this just for the sake of making nice and relieving others. Conservatives too, or their uncomfortableness. My advice to any queer would be this: to be left alone, to enjoy and exploit all the secured protections, freedoms, and liberties this country allows, which you have every right to, Extend equal toleration and courtesy to that which is traditionally natural to the continued existence of man. In other words, unwide your panties. Relax, back off a little bit, quit trying to rub your lifestyle all over everybody. Just behave like a mature adult, not a pervert, and do what you do in private. Does that sound like a homophobe to you? Do what you do in private. Most thinking adults will say the same thing. But Ultimate Warrior died before we got to see, the beauty of the drag queen story hour. Right? And he was writing about this stuff 10 years ago. This whole thing started with when DePaul University, which I'm guessing is a Catholic school, because that's what he's rambling about in this. He is rambling in this writing about a Catholic school having a queer studies program. And that's really what he's flipping out about is, the queer studies concept. And this was before most people had even been talking about it. Nobody was even talking about critical theory back then. And he's caught up on it, talking about queer studies and stuff like that. Now that's the kind of stuff that we see now that has brought us men can be women and women can be men and all that kind of stuff, right? There's a reason why you never really get all of this. When they make these documentaries and stuff talking about him, they don't give you the whole thing. Like there's hundreds and hundreds of articles I had to go through. Some people actually did try to source their articles. A lot of the Wayback Machine stuff has been taken down. But usually people find these choice comments that he makes that are pretty much him just being sort of mean. And some of his stuff is kind of mean-spirited. But when you read it, like I even skimmed through this. And I came to the concept like, oh, okay, he doesn't really hate gays. He just doesn't agree with the lifestyle. He doesn't like the lifestyle. So what? There's a lot of people who don't like the gay lifestyle. It's okay for people to not like you and they can respect you. He's saying that you have every right to equal protection under the law. That's not enough? What more do you want? So that's an interesting thing, man. That's an interesting thing. But what is even more interesting is that Ultimate Warrior was also up on the diversity trap. This is what he said about diversity, but he wrapped it in homosexuality. He says, homosexuals claimed for decades that they were unjustly alienated from national acceptance and discourse, that their voice was not being heard. So now what do modern queers do? They use the same intoleration they claim fought against as the very knife they stick in my back. Diversity is simply a superficial, pragmatically used code word for them that has no grounding in anything stable and principled. Diversity, like all their other liberal code words, means something different at any given time, depending on what radical, unobjective purpose they need it to serve at any moment. End of quote. Tremendous. Tremendous. This is insightful stuff because we know that diversity doesn't mean anything. We know it. Diversity doesn't mean anything. This is 2021. I don't know when he wrote this. What year did he write this in? I don't even see a year on this. So this is crazy how this guy was really on the ball. He continues, and this is so interesting. He says, think about it. To the liberal extremists, diversity even extends itself to the diverse meaning of words. Any word. That every word can have any meaning at any time. Look at what has happened to the word illegal as it relates to illegal immigrants. Just how long will it be before using illegal immigrant is hate speech, unlawful discrimination, evidence that you are a bigot? Same thing has happened to the word queer. Same thing is happening now to the word spaz. And he gave a link to the BBC. He was correct. Like when they say defund the police, then they turn around and say, oh, we don't mean defund the police when we say defund the police. We don't mean, here's what we mean when we say Black Lives Matter. We're not saying only Black Lives Matter. It's always a secondary definition or a tripwire. So you can't fully understand what the hell they're saying. What does whiteness mean? Well, whiteness doesn't mean white people. It's a system of bluggity blahs and blue blues that was cooked up in a classroom somewhere, so you don't understand what the fuck they're talking about. How is the Ultimate Warrior so up on this stuff? Is this what they hate? They hate this guy. He continues, this is going to be the last quote I read. He says, quote, queer is an offensive label when the damn school has an entire studies department titled the same word. This is that is the crazy thing, right? Because it's literally called queer studies. People now are calling themselves queers. You can look on Twitter and you can see people saying that all the time that they're queer. So why would they get so upset about being called queers? So that's not the problem. It was, the queers don't make the world work. Now, that doesn't mean that I agree with everything that the Ultimate Warrior says. But there is some insight of things that he's saying as basic boilerplate conservative stuff about personal responsibility, about Christianity, about, that kind of stuff. It's just written and performed much like like Dana Warrior said about it being almost like a Rush Limbaugh. Yeah, that's what it kind of comes across as. It comes across a little bit mean, but he's not this crazy kill all the gays. The way that these people are acting, you think that he was trying to talk about gays like Hitler talked about Jews. It's like, no. He just didn't approve of the lifestyle and thought that these people were being emotional and manipulative, and a lot of them are. I mean, it's just the facts. So let's get into. All right, so I read to you Ultimate Warrior's kind of, I guess you want to say, his quote side of the story, considering neither biography decided to give any sort of context to the things that he was saying or why. And some of the stuff that you could say that there's no excuse for it, and you're perfectly correct in saying so. But let's talk about Sherry Tyree, because I've been very glowing about how she has participated in this Dark Side of the Ring piece, and she did a very good job. However, when I did some digging, I found that she was trying to sell a book called Behind the Paint back in 2008, and several wrestling websites picked it up. And the book claims, of course, that she knew the stunning truth behind Ultimate Warrior because she was with him for 10 years. And that despite the fact that he's pro-family, he's a cheater. He had all these affairs. Despite the fact that he says he's anti-drug, he actually did steroids, which he, of course, admitted to later on in his life, which, most of these guys admit to later, eventually. But she also makes a stark claim that he may have been struggling with his sexuality. And this is something, he was still alive when this happened. Because this was in 2008. And it's like on some wrestling websites. If I remember to post them in the description, or at least take pictures of and put them online. Hopefully I don't forget. And that's the kind of stuff that when Dana Warrior said she didn't want to be involved with the smut and the filth, that's the kind of stuff that she didn't want to be involved with. You got this lady who was trying to write this tell-all book and saying a bunch of stuff in it. True. Is it true? Who knows? Hell, if I don't know. I don't know the guy that well. But it just seemed like an interesting time. And it seems like they do that a lot, don't they? When somebody is kind of like, you know what, gays, take it or leave it. They're like, are you really gay? Are you protesting too much? And, it's very strange. But, her basically saying that he's a cheater and a steroid abuser and a drug abuser and all that kind of stuff. It is, it is kind of inflammatory. But, we see that they talked about some of that in the biography. They talked about it in the Dark Side of the Ring a little bit. They didn't really talk as much about his drugs use in the Dark Side of the Ring. They talked about it a little bit. But she just said he was behaving erratically. They didn't want to say anything that was going to get them sued. And WWE is not going to say anything that's going to tank the Warrior brand. So we're not going to be able to get too much of the truth out of either one of these shows, But it says a lot that Sherry Tyree was trying to shop around a book to basically lambast the Ultimate Warrior and try to monetize their time together. And she has every right to do so, but I don't know if the book was ever published. You know, so maybe I should look and see if the book was published. From the looks of things, the book was never actually published, or if it was, nobody actually read it. So I can't tell you what was in it, but you know, the blurb, I could read the blurb, but I choose not to. But it basically says that he was struggling with his sexuality or something to that effect in the blurb for the book. In order to, you know, she was shopping it around trying to get attention, but I guess nobody bit on the worm that she was dangling out there. So, you know, she, who knows, you know, ex-wife with an axe to grind, you know, true story, who knows. But you did, it's pretty ironic that she was the main subject of this biography, of this documentary on Ultimate Warrior, and she was ready to write a book basically saying that he was a drug addict and a gay man. So, but that's the reason why, you know, I don't trust Vice. I don't trust Vice. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. The kind of hard hitting analysis that I bring to 3 Count Commentaries. Thank you guys for your time, and I'll talk to you guys later.
Old non-aggression. Once that lesson sets in, you'll see a session, but you got an affection for no progression. Regret